Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute's 2022 Youth Climate Summit. My name is Noelle, and I'll be your primary host for today. Our youth climate activist for today is Rain Sullivan from Hawaii, USA, and our subject matter expert is Dr. Isabel Rivera-Collazo from San Diego, USA. You will also be hearing from last year's YCS alumni Ava Gibson and Laura Hopman. Wait, sorry. Hold on a second. Where's my co-host? Dreas, are you here?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to have you all back here. Welcome once again to the second Bermuda Youth Climate Summit. We had a great show out yesterday. We loved to see the participation in the chat, so let's keep that going today. We have some really exciting presentations for you all.
All right, guys, this is a quick reminder that today we will be focusing on climate impacts, the who, what, and why you should care about what happens to the climate around you. Please feel free to submerge yourself in this experience. Communicate your questions and concerns. We want to know what you have to say. Yes, your mics will be muted, but feel free to post your questions and ideas in the chat. And please participate in the polls. This is your Youth Climate Summit. It's about your future within your environment. The UEI have just provided a meeting room, but it's up to you to decide how you use it. Shout out to our partners, HSBC and AXA XL, for making this all possible. Let's get started. Our first question of the day is, how do you think Bermudians will be most affected by climate change? The poll will come up on your screen. Please select one answer. By the way, all answers that you provide during polls and Mentimeters are completely anonymous. Hey, Andreas, if you could see the poll, can you help me out, please?
Yeah, it looks like we have great participation. About 90% of people have responded, and the overwhelming majority of people are saying that sea level rise and extreme weather will be the main impacts. So people were definitely paying attention in yesterday's presentation.
Awesome. That's great, guys. And thank you again for your participation. All right. So we're going to be moving on. I'd like to welcome our youth climate activist for today, Rain Sullivan from San Francisco, USA. Rain is the co-chair and USA representative for the Sustainable Ocean Alliance's Youth Policy Advisory Council. He will be here on island until Friday. Rain will have 5 minutes to present, and I'll give him a 1-minute warning before his question and answer period starts. So don't forget to post your questions in the chat. Rain, welcome to Bermuda. We're excited to have you here.
Mahalo Noel and aloha kakahiaka. That's how you say good morning in Hawaiian. I'm really excited to speak with you all today. I've been looking forward to this, honestly, for months. So thank you so much to Carla, to the Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute. But more importantly, thank you guys for your time, for sharing it with me, for sharing your insights. I loved seeing the poll in the outset. There's so many aspects of climate change that all of our island nations will face, whether it's health and it's sea level rise and its food insecurity. So I really appreciate you guys sharing your thoughts, and I can't wait to hear more, both in this talk, but also on island. Today's topic is, thinking about the climate impacts and why should I care? And I think before I begin, I, really want to give you guys a sense of my story. And I'm really excited to hear your story as well. And so my story of how I got into this is, I encountered a lot of people in the space for whom climate was a topic of discussion, whether it's in school or maybe they saw a newspaper article, or maybe they sat in on a conference like this. But for me, it was a little different, growing up, as an islander in coastal communities. You couldn't remove me from nature. I was swimming and diving as much as I could. I was fishing, I was kayaking, anything and everything with the water I wanted to be a part of. And I had a profound love for the natural environment and for all the species that live there. And so for me, loving biodiversity. I really wanted to do zoology and bioengineering. Change of plan. I'm here at law school. That didn't work. I went to high school and did advanced math and science. I said, you know what? Science will be a passion, but it may not be a profession for me. So let me think of how I can best work on these topics from different angles. And so I've been doing law and policy for several years now, and I love it. But for me, it always comes down to the fundamental realization I had as a kid that, you know, we are a part of nature in an integrated sense, not a part from it. And many island communities, you know, illustrate this value, particularly those in the Pacific, this understanding of the intricacies and the interconnectedness that planetary health and our island's health and the ocean's health directly affects our health. And so when I saw it in crisis, when I was studying animals and I was studying the different tides and the biogeochemical interactions and the different environments within, you know, islands and coastal ecosystems, not only in Hawaii, but in South Florida and the Caribbean, I knew that this is something I wanted to dedicate my life to. And, you know, I will be honest with you guys, I didn't come into this, you know, knowing what was the right path, what was the best path. And I want you guys to all know, like, there is no best or right path. You know, the climate crisis is a crisis that demands all of us to contribute in many different ways, whether it's through art and sport, whether it's through science and policy and law. There is not one right way to do it. And I have been fortunate to approach it from many different aspects. My mom is a musician. No one in my family does science or law or policy or a lot of climate stuff. But I was raised very early on with an understanding of my responsibility to my community, particularly as an islander, of thinking about the shared sense of stewardship that, you know, whether our ancestors or our elders took care of the lands and waters for us to benefit. And, you know, it's time for us to stand up. You know, I think about Bob Marley's song, you know, Get Up, Stand Up. This is something I listened to a lot as a kid. So I always think about things in reference to music. And it's not just standing up for your rights, it's also standing up for your community. It's about standing up for your island and standing up for our planet.
Sorry,
And
but this is your 1-minute warning to Q&A.
okay, well, sorry, I have a lot to say, so hopefully we get to it in the Q&A. And so I also want you guys to also think about climate change as a threat multiplier. And that was sort of discussed in the outset of the poll, that there is so many different aspects of health and society and economics that are affected. And one of the things that I was taught, and I'd really love to hear, you know, your opinion and your thoughts in the Q&A, is thinking about what is your gift. And your gift doesn't have to be, you know, an academic gift in terms of you're great at math. It can be, you know, I'm great at building and serving my community. I'm great at art. I'm great at, you know, at sport. And I think about how we have to show up for our communities and show up for the climate in respect of our gifts, and how we approach the climate crisis through our gifts. And so I really want you guys to think about it. I want to hear it either during this call or when I'm in Bermuda, and really sort of talk story with you guys about that and how to best approach this, because I also really want to learn from you. So I think with that, I guess I'll close out. Apologize for running over, and excited for the Q&A.
No worries, Rain. That was awesome. And your story is so inspiring. I guess I'll start out with a question. So what can islands uniquely contribute to the global discussion policy?
There's a couple different things. I think about Prime Minister Mia Mottley's speech at COP26 last year, referencing an old reggae song by Eddie Grant about the front line. You know, she asked the world, you know, will they mourn us on the front line as island nations and communities? We're on the front line of the climate crisis, of sea level rise, and all of these different effects, including extreme weather. And that is a unique challenge in terms of what we can bring in the moral authority in these spaces. I just got back from Egypt at COP27, and the massive breakthroughs that we saw were because of island communities. That sense of leadership, that sense of interconnectedness. I think about the Pacific poet Apeli Hau'ofa, that we are not defined by the smallness of our islands, but by the greatness of our oceans, and how it connects all of us. And every community, whether you're an island or not, is an ocean community. And that interconnectedness is something that I think us as islanders really understand, and we can share with the world of how, we approach things, as simple as, I was taught as a kid, like, you take what you need, not just what you can.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer. We do have a question in the chat here. So how much pressure can island nations put on larger jurisdictions who are really the generators of the changes in climate?
It's a really great question. Pretty complex one too. I would say there's a couple different approaches. Or one, many of the states, like let's give the US for example, or the United Kingdom, have islands within their territory. But unfortunately, a lot of times these islands are not part of the conversation. So I think too, from a national level and campaigning for domestic policy, we really need our island communities to speak up and make that point. I brought it up to the US delegation last year, said, hey guys, there's over 100 people here, and there's not a lot of island representation within the delegation. We hope to have that change, because whether it's Puerto Rico or it's Guam or it's Hawaii or it's America Samoa, there are so many islands just within the United States that are often not even put on the map when people think about it. In the UK, same thing. So that's one aspect. I think too about knowing the story of your community. I think about my friend Vanessa Nakate, who talks about, when thinks about adaptation and mitigation, that we can't adapt to a loss of culture. We can't adapt to a loss of heritage and a loss of that future. And islanders, that's at greatest risk for us. So it's also important for us to know the stories of our community, to be stewards of that, because that's not only important domestically, but also important in the international context of how we can share best practices, but also how we can share our community stories to build that interconnection, to continue to propel that momentum.
That's so true. And I hope you guys were listening, right? He said, speak up, definitely. That's so important. I guess I'll pose a question. So what are you most excited about in the climate space?
I would say I am, it's one of the really big challenges of dealing with this is, of course, particularly being an islander, the climate anxiety, right? Like, these are really hard topics we're all here to discuss. The stakes are really high, particularly for us in the islands. But I'm always so inspired and motivated by the youth community. I mean, I just came back from COP27. It's the first time ever that we had a whole youth pavilion dedicated, and it was amazing. There was a co-working space, there was an auditorium, and everyone was there. I mean, we had everyone from Michael Bloomberg to Prime Minister Mia Mottley come, and not in the sense of, sort of window dressing, but actually listening to youth. Prime Minister Mottley gave an incredible speech, a very candid discussion, one-on-one, with youth, and she was actually listening, and sharing space. And so when I think about the momentum of how much the youth have contributed to this, and raising awareness and raising solutions, it's something that provides me with incalculable amounts of inspiration and hope.
That's awesome. Thank you for the hope, because we really need it. We do. We have a question in the chat here. What would happen if the climate went insane one day? Bakari, that's a pretty good question.
Well, I really hope that we're not, that we don't reach that. Maybe you guys have heard of 1.5, and that's the idea of keeping warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the increase. And for us on the front lines, particularly in island context, I always tell people that's not a guideline, that's not a suggestion. It's an existential level for us, right? 1.5 is, anything above 1.5 is really catastrophic for us in the islands. I mean, we have the foreign minister of Tuvalu just this week talking about how they're having to go to the metaverse because Tuvalu is going to disappear. We have all these island nations by 2030 that are projected to go underwater. So I really hope the climate doesn't go insane, because it's already really bad right now. But I want us to keep that hope of 1.5, as that is the ceiling. Like, we can't go above that, because that is true insanity. And for us in the islands, it will be horrific. So we've got to keep the faith, we've got to keep the momentum.
All right, so you've got 2 minutes left, enough time for our last question. Kisei Bell from Cedar Bridge Academy wants to know, what is the temperature now and how close is it to the 1.5?
Well, it's definitely getting there, and I also see Kisei asked a question about sports. I want to address that quickly too, because I appreciate that. The warming projections that I've seen last from the international agreements, I think it's 2.1 to 2.2. So way beyond it. We're not there yet. I think in terms of right now number, I think we're at 1.1 to 1.3. But our current international contribution, I mean, our current international policies have us way beyond 1.5. So we're trying to bring it down. Again, there have been great efforts made at COP27 and other nations like the United States just passing the Inflation Reduction Act that hopefully will get us down. And to the point about sports, I really like this question. I had the opportunity to participate in a sports panel last year at COP, and it was really cool. I was there with Nico Rosberg of Formula One. There were folks from FIFA, from sailing communities, all different types. And I talked about ocean sports. That's something I'm passionate about, diving, surfing, all of that great stuff. But it was really inspiring to see how the sports community is stepping up, whether it's sustainability in design of, stadiums to materials, but also about how athletes are playing a bigger role and using that platform to bring awareness. So people like Nico highlighting the climate crisis, utilizing their private wealth to invest in local communities and have people, share not only the love of the game, but also the love of the planet.
That's awesome, Rain. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Your story is inspiring, and we look forward to seeing you in person at BUEI on Friday and Saturday.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Can't wait to see you guys soon. Aloha.
Next up, we have Dr. Isabel Rivera-Colaza. She's an assistant professor on biological, ecological, and human adaptation to climate change. Check out her bio in the chat. She will have 20 minutes to speak with us, and I'll give her a 1-minute warning before the question and answer period starts. So be prepared to post your questions in the chat below. Welcome, Dr. Colazo. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Noel. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation to share with you. As you are familiar, you are seeing my slides, are you? Are you able to see my slides? Cool, thank you. Awesome, thanks. As you are familiar with Menti already, you will be able to interact with these slides as I go on. It's an honor to be here with you. My name is Isabel Rivera Collazo, and today I will be talking about hope. What about hope? With all the crazy, ugly things we are expecting of climate change and all the possibility and uncertainty of, negative impacts that we are facing as islanders, what can we think about hope and the youth and our culture and our identity? And I will start by introducing myself, right? Sharing with you who I am. I am professor at the University of California, San Diego. I am currently in California. But I am originally from Boriquen. I'm Boricua. I'm from a neighboring island to you guys. And Puerto Rico is the archipelago. We are 4 large islands and many smaller ones. The largest island is called Boriquen, and that's where I was born. But we also have another 2 islands that are also inhabited, the island of Vieque that you can see kind of the shadow back there in the horizon, and the island of Culebra, which you can see here. And so that's where our people live from. So being an islander, living as part of the sea, this maritime importance in our identity is central to who we are. And just as it has been shared throughout this summit, being of the islands and being of the sea is extremely important to who we are and our identity, but also it's highly threatened by climate change and potential climate impacts. So what I want us to think is, who are we? And in this case, this is me. I'm not just a professor. I am also my family. I have 3 kids, Andrea, Alejandro, and Lorenzo, and this is my son-in-law, Rafa, and this is my husband, Luis. And my profession is environmental archaeologist. I work to understand how our islands have changed through time. I work to understand how were the landscapes in the past, and how has climate has affected our places, how our ancestors have lived in these lands, in this case on my island, and climate has changed in the past. So what did people live when they faced crazy strong hurricanes, when they faced warming sea surface temperature, when they face all these challenges that also affected them. I grew up, when I was a kid, I grew up as a farmer. I was living on the mountains of Puerto Rico, and we used to grow herbs and plants. So I lived always in close contact to the land. And now I'm still trying to look far in the past and see how my ancestors lived on our islands through time. So our research, and I lead a large lab of people working on these topics. We try to understand how disasters happen and how climate change affects us. So some of those questions that you were posing in the chat earlier, we look at them also in the past. What does it mean when there is increased temperature? What does it mean when sea level rises? What does it mean when we lose our wetlands? When there is coastal erosion, when there is coastal flooding, and what did our ancestors did? When there is a disaster, what do people do? And we started working on this research before Hurricane Maria, but Hurricane Maria brought the issue to the forefront. And more recently also Hurricane Fiona. We could see our identity highly threatened. Hurricane Maria, you might or might not remember, was a Category 5 storm that hit our island. It crossed from south to north and severely affected our island. Brought, there were 10 feet of water, 3 meters of water flooding some of the coastal plains. There was a lot of loss, a lot of damage that affected us directly. So I saw in the chat earlier, somebody asked what happens if the weather goes crazy. That's not something that will happen in the future. It's things that are already happening. No one would have expected to see a disaster such as Hurricane Maria affecting us. So that brought forth the question, what happens when climate goes crazy? What do we do? And how can we respond to these things? So if I am Boricua, how do you feel? If we are thinking about identity, if we are talking about, being who we are, then are you Bermudian? How do you feel about it, right? This is the first definition. So I'll give you a few minutes for you to, a few seconds for you to think about this. I know I won't stay here too long so that we can use the time, but I can see that a large majority of you are define yourselves as Bermudian, and there is still a number of you that don't. And I'm going to change screens so that we can continue moving. So how do you know that you are Bermudian? I know that I'm Puerto Rican and Boricua because I was born on my island. And I can see that many of you were born. So being born is what makes you Bermudian, having a passport. I have some people that are Bermudians, but their parents are not. Their family, their birth is an important portion. Your accent, I like that. The accent defines you, how you interact, how you present yourself. My accent also is very telling. Feelings of connection to the land, the culture. So when we are saying that, oh, this is awesome, it's going to continue moving along. This is super awesome. I'm going to go to the next screen so we can also talk. What is the most important? What is most important about your identity? This is super cool as well. So I see almost everything is very important. The way we do things, the music, the towns and things around you, the land, the sea is more important than the land. That's very cool. The community, the shared experiences, the ancestors and shared family histories. All these things, the reason why I'm asking all these questions is if we are talking about the impacts of climate change to who we are, to our identity, how would you feel if you were to lose it? How would you feel if we would lose the land, if we would lose our identity, if we would lose our community, our shared experiences? That is what we are talking about when we talk about the potential impacts of climate change. To some extent, yes, we are talking about sea level rise. We are talking about more extreme weather. We are talking about the pressure of these changes over the health system. But at the end, the issue is that the sea level rise will affect our land and will affect our sea. It will affect the plants that we see around us. It will affect our community. It will affect our buildings. It will affect the way in which we do things. Climate change, when we think that climate change poses a threat, yes, sea level rise, yes, extreme weather, but the problem is that climate change can impact what we eat and how we eat it, where we live and how safe we are on our land. And if those things change, it will affect the way we do things. It will affect cultural heritage. And who we are has really deep time, really deep roots in time. Many of us have long histories on the land, like you saw, some of you were born in the place, some of you, your parents came from somewhere else, but histories and social processes and, personal family decisions brought everyone to Bermuda or to the island that you come from. I saw someone said that they were Filipino. Our identity, who we are, includes traditional knowledge, includes the history from our ancestors. If we forgot it, if we don't know that depth, if it's not written in the history books, because as you guys know, there's a lot of history that is not written on the history books, then it can be recovered through archaeology. Who we are is also affected by colonization, by historical processes. So climate change is not just the fact that the sea level will be higher and the coastal plains will flood, it also poses a threat to our identity. So the reason why I want to, and we can see this in archaeology, we can see this we saw this specifically during Hurricane Maria. I mentioned that the storm crossed the island, from my island, from the south to the north. My research in archaeology is specifically on this area here. So the eye of the storm went over right where the area where I've been working with and the archaeological sites that we are working with. Initially, we heard all of the destruction that the storm caused and all our family members and friends suffering and trying to recover and trying to make sense of an island that looked very different from the day before. But it also affected the things that we are used to, affected the way we live. We had elders that didn't have power anymore. We had family members that decided to move away from the island. We had buildings and historical places that we were very used to and collapsed and were destroyed. So in response to this, so it's not only but what can we do, right? What can we do about all this? In the area where I'm working with, we saw coastal erosion. We are seeing, this is the site, this is next to an archaeological site where I'm working with. This is how it looked in 2015, and this is how it looked in 2020. Today it's even worse than that. And during the storm, this is a sand dune ridge, and the storm broke over the sand dune ridge and caused massive erosion. And if the sand dunes are not there, then the ocean can come in and flood the coastal plain. So we saw also loss of cultural heritage. As I mentioned, buildings collapse. Some of those archaeological sites that hold the history of our ancestors are washing away with the storms and with coastal erosion. We saw also impacts to society as climate change heightened, showed how we are vulnerable and the uncertainty in the future. So in response to this, we created the project DUNAS, which is Descendants United for Nature Adaptation and Sustainability. And I say we because it's not me. I said we because it is the volunteers, the members on the community, the resident communities, other NGOs that I work with, my grad student. So it's really not just my work. And in this project, we are working to figure out ways in which we can protect our identity and protect our land in spite of climate change. So we are working together to translate that ancient knowledge into future wisdom, trying to recover that knowledge from our past to figure out ways in which we can face the future. And so the project DUNAS has three main goals: to restore natural ecosystem using nature-based solutions, biomimicry, and wetland restoration, to protect cultural heritage. And for that, we did participatory archaeological excavation. So we did an archaeological excavation together with the members of the community and the volunteers, and shared that knowledge from the past, trying to understand, and I'll share a little bit more about that. And we are also engaged on climate action on site, supporting the resiliency of our communities. Through the archaeological research, we want to see how our ancestors lived on our land. How did they face these challenges? There have been hurricanes, massive hurricanes in the past. How did they face it? And how did they survive and thrive? If our question is, how can I keep my identity with all these crazy challenges that we are expecting of climate change? How did they do it and maintain their identity? How did their lives made us who we are now? How did their decisions affected who we are now? DUNAS is not just the archaeology, we also have other elements. We have a virtual trail that you can visit. If you search Climate Science Alliance DUNAS, you will come to a page where you can access a virtual trail and you can visit our coastline and hear the volunteers telling the stories of the place. We also run a physical trail. So this line here, we cycle it. We go in bicycles along the area, sharing the story of coastal erosion, of ecosystem, the importance of biodiversity. We share the story of the archaeological sites and the impacts of climate change. And we end with an invitation for climate action and a discussion of options. We have also printed 3D artifacts so that the people can touch and be close to these archaeological artifacts that are very sensitive, but are part of our identity. And we also use art to communicate the whole process and to, express our identity and our feelings and our thoughts through colors and art. So this work will not stop climate change. I was seeing in the chat earlier, some people asking, what can I do to lower the temperature from 1.7 to 1.5? Many of our communities, and in particular, very marginalized communities, we already contribute very little to climate, to the variables that are increasing climate change. So this project will not stop sea level rise, but it is inspiring us to engage in climate action and to define what it means to survive climate change, to find locally and culturally relevant mitigation and adaptation strategies. It puts back on our communities the power to learn their land, see how climate change is impacting them, and feel inspired to take action to mitigate those changes and find adaptation strategies that will allow them to keep their identity in this land. So I want to go back to hope. Climate is changing. Things that are happening very fast, are real, are happening extremely much faster than what we could do. I can see changes on our coastline, and I'm sure you do too. Year to year, a beach that looked in a certain way last year, it looks very different this year. But the question that I want to pose to you, aside from all the very inspiring action that we can do at a global scale, at a personal scale, how do you want to look after climate change? And what does it mean to survive climate change and still be Bermudian or be part of your own identity? And that is something that you have the power to decide. You are the one who is able to see upon these changes and what is important to you. You said that the way you do things, the land, the sea, is important to the Bermudian identity. Well, what does it mean to survive climate change? And that is something that even I, as a professor, cannot tell you. You guys, and especially with this summit, have the power and the opportunity to go over these thought processes, find solutions in your identity, and have the power to then define, with all the things that we are facing, what do we want the future to look at? And you guys are that. So I'll stop with that there, I think. Yes. And let's take some questions.
Dr. Collazo, thank you for your insightful presentation and encouraging us to ask hard questions. All right, so the first question that we have in the chat here: what does it mean to survive it and still be Bermudian?
So the question of being Bermudian, I leave it to you. From our portion, from the archaeology, we can see in the archaeological record that surviving climate change means a continuation of core identities, of core relations, like relationship between people, relationship with the land, relationship with food practices, with the places where people live in. And there are some changes that are acceptable in society, that are culturally acceptable, and there are changes that once everything disappears, then we archaeologists define that as culture change. So I was seeing before I started the poll that you were running, Noel, one of the questions was food security. Well, and it received rather lower votes than other threats. Well, food security is extremely important, because if we cannot maintain, food practices in the way we're used to, that can change a lot of who we are. It's very depressing to not being able to, get all those comfort foods that you're used to. It's part of our relationship with the land, the flavors, the smells, is part of our identity. So we should think about food security as an important challenge that we need to think of. So what does it mean to survive it and still be Bermudian? That's one of the questions that you guys should sit down and think, because it should be Bermudians, the ones who answer that question.
Thank you so much for that response. Our next question from Aria at Clearwater is: how is climate change affecting farms and our food?
So our foods, the different things that we eat, have specific environmental constraints. So if we want to eat wheat, it needs a specific amount of precipitation. It needs a specific amount of temperature. If we need to consume olive oil, if we want to eat snapper, it needs to have a specific characteristics of the ecosystem. If we need to eat crabs, you need a specific set of wetlands. If those things change, we will not have snapper, we will not have crabs, we will not have, the foods that we collect from the ocean. So and those are the same variables that change with climate change. We are talking about higher temperatures in the oceans, higher temperatures in the atmosphere, changes in the amount of rain. Those are the things that affect our food. So how is climate change affecting our food? It is the things that allow the plants to produce, and the things that allow the animals to grow. Those are the same variables that are changing. So that is why we have to think about what are the components that are in our diet and what are the environmental constraints of those components. So if we want to eat bread, then somebody needs to produce the wheat. Are the places where wheat is produced being affected by climate change? And that's when we start thinking about what is our food security, what is the vulnerability of our food security.
Thank you. That makes total sense. Our next question is, how is climate change affecting the ocean?
That's a great question. It's affecting it in several ways, some of them more evident than others. First of all, the temperature of the oceans is rising. And when the ocean becomes warmer, it happens two main things. First, that by being warmer, it holds less oxygen, and it also dissolves carbonates. It dissolves calcium carbonate. And if shells and corals and phytoplankton and different planktonic animals, they need calcium carbonate in the water. So if the oceans are warmer, animals cannot necessarily have the components that they need to live. So that is one thing. The warmer oceans also affect the survivability of coral reefs. And that is why you have coral bleaching, for example. It can affect, when the oceans are warmer, it affects the power and the energy that storms have. So storms are stronger. It affects circulation in the ocean, so where the currents are going and how fast they are going. It affects also the location of the rain bands. So there are many things in which the climate change is affecting the oceans. One of the scariest ones is increased temperature because of ocean acidification and because of the impact that it can have on fisheries and the biodiversity.
Yes, ocean acidification is a big one. It's something that I deal with in my own industry of aquaculture and fisheries, so I can totally understand that. I'm going to move on to our next question. Actually, I'm going to merge the next two questions together. Will Bermuda be affected like Costa Rica was? And how did the people in Puerto Rico respond to climate change?
So I didn't work in Costa Rica. It was Puerto Rico, but it's fine. So many people confuse the two. It has the Rico part on it. Yes, possibly. To the first question, if it will be affected like Puerto Rico was, it depends on how the storms change, and one of the hurricanes change in the Hurricane Ali movement. So things are changing, and it's possible that at some point some hurricane will go over the Bermuda. So it's important to think, if that happens, what are we going to do? Bahamas went under Hurricane Dorian for 5 or 7 days under a massive Category 5, and that was unbelievable that a storm would stay put for so long. So yeah, it's possible that you could be hit by a storm at some point. How do people in Puerto Rico respond to climate change? In the past, there are many, so climate change, we cannot think about climate change as one thing, as one global, one item. It's many individual things. And something important to remember is that climate change is an average, it's not weather. And the average is so large that it's very hard to grasp as an individual, especially as a young individual, because most possibly in the lifetime that you guys have lived, you have not experienced climate change. What you have seen from the time you were born to now, it's still one blip. Climate change is an average of many decades of time. So we are comparing things, how they were well before you were born to how they are now. And that's where we see the change. What we are experiencing is changes in the extremes of weather. And to that, so there are many extremes of weather that we can talk about, like extreme storms, more precipitation, flooding, and we have different ways in which people have responded to it, even within the same identity. So 4,000 years ago, for example, 3,000 years ago, a long, long time ago, there was a time of more rain. Pardon?
Apologies, unfortunately, we are out of time for questions. I'd like to thank you so much for engaging with us today, and to our participants, thank you for your questions. All of these questions will be saved in the chat, and possibly Dr. Rivera-Collazo can provide answers to them at a later date.
That's very good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your time. All right, guys, so we're going to move on to our next Mentimeter question of the day. Please share your thoughts with a sentence or two. All right, interesting. So the question is, what connection do you now see between climate change and cultural identity? That's actually a really cool concept. Could cultural identity be eroded by climate change if we all die? That's possible. If we lose our island, we might lose our culture. What means most to us? Climate change affects different places differently. That's awesome. All right, guys, thanks very much. Great responses. So up next, we have a very informative video about plastics on our island. The magnitude of the global plastics crisis is enormous. Did you know that the government of Bermuda has committed to regulate the use of single-use plastics by the end of 2022? They have also committed to educating the public about recycling and reusing items that would otherwise end up in our landfills or being incinerated. Have a look at this 5-minute video and think about how Bermuda's environment could change within your lifetime if this dilemma is not solved.
Obviously, Bermuda is an island, so we are directly impacted by the ocean's plastic. Also, each one of us Bermudians is generating 374 pounds of plastic per year. But still, why should I care? Well, first of all, we Bermudians live on an island.
We sit in the middle of the Sargasso Sea. We're the only landmass, and there's a Great Atlantic garbage patch. And all of that plastic is washing up on our beaches.
Big surprise that 8 million tons of plastic that gets dumped into the world's oceans ends up floating around in the middle of the world's oceans. Bermuda sits right next to one of those floating garbage dumps. That dump sits on top of the Sargasso Sea, which was once one of the most beautiful and amazing ecosystems of the world.
And it's not just in Bermuda's Sargasso Sea. In the North Pacific alone, fish eat 12 to 24,000 tons of plastic per year.
Most of the trash will be fragments of something, and you can actually see where turtles and fish have bitten into that plastic trash that we're picking up off the ocean.
Fish all over the world eat plastic. Often, the fish get eaten by seabirds. Therefore, the plastic ends up in the birds.
So how is that affecting all the animals in Bermuda?
So what you're seeing is the plastic is going into their digestive system, and basically it has nowhere to go. So it is clogging their whole bodies up.
The Bermuda Aquarium Museum and Zoo did a recent study examining baitfish in Bermuda. What they found was astonishing. 40% of the baitfish had microplastics in their guts.
What you're also seeing is that birds' nests in Bermuda are made out of plastic. And so it is impacting not just our oceans, but our land animals as well.
Plastics in the environment are lipophilic. So plastics are drawn out of plastic and into food in fat cells. So you're more likely to get plastics or microplastics in your food that contains fat. So the worst thing you could do is get mac and cheese, put it in a plastic container.
The plastic we humans eat comes from our food packaging. So all those harmful chemicals that fish and animals eat, they get into our food too.
The plastic chemicals that you're consuming in your food, things like phytates which leach in, and also the BPA, that causes a problem not just in terms of male health and male fertility, affecting sperm counts, but also affects female reproductive health too.
This is especially true when hot food or drinks are placed in plastic or styrofoam containers, like your takeout food.
And so if you take a water bottle, for example, you are drinking that water bottle and it's been in Bermuda, heat and all the rest of it, sunlight, and it's already starting to fall apart. And so you're consuming that plastic from that water bottle.
Plastics are more likely to come out of a container and go into your food when that container is heated. Okay, so if you're going to heat food in a microwave, then it's a really good idea not to heat it in a plastic container and to use a glass container.
In the end, there is so much plastic in the environment that you almost cannot avoid eating it.
We know that we have got 51 trillion microplastic particles in the ocean, and they get consumed by plankton, which gets consumed by fish, which then gets consumed by you. And unfortunately, even if you don't eat fish, you still can't avoid it because it's sometimes in the air you breathe, it's in sea salt, it's in honey, it's in beer, and it's sometimes in the water that you drink.
Needless to say, that plastic has the same effect on sea life that it does on us.
COVID-19 made the problem dramatically worse with frightening results. Every month, we humans use 129 billion face masks and 65 billion gloves. They all contain plastic and they all turn into plastic waste.
And the idea that they won't be able to necessarily have children of their own because of the plastic that is put in their lunchboxes is really quite terrifying. We really need to think about the future and think about how we can make sure that we leave this planet in a better place than it was given to us.
We each have a part to play in influencing the businesses that are producing and using plastics. As a consumer, please try to reduce your use of single-use plastics. This is a Mentimeter word cloud. The more times a word is entered, the bigger it gets. There's a link in the chat. Click that link and you can enter your response. Again, your responses are anonymous. Our question is, in a word or two, describe what does sustainability mean to you? Keeping the planet alive. That's a great one. Not wasting. Conservation. Conservation is a big one, so that means several of you have an awesome definition of sustainability and conservation. Great responses, guys. Keep them coming. Preservation. Long-term solutions, that's a good one too. So next up, we're going to be discussing the Youth Climate Summit definition of sustainability. All right, so the Youth Climate Summit definition is the regenerative use of resources that sustains our needs today without compromising the needs of future generations. Examples are how we collect our rainwater and growing local produce. All right, next up, it's time to hear from two of our own, Laura Hopman and Ava Gibson. Ava and Laura were part of the 2021 Youth Climate Summit group, specifically the sustainability group. All right, Ava and Laura, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourselves. Laura, why don't you go first?
Hi, my name is Laura. I am 17 in my last year at YCS. And for the past year, I have been involved with the Youth Climate Summit Sustainability Group.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Ava. I'm also 17 in my final year at YCS, and I've also been able to work with the sustainability group this year.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here today. Ava, how did you first get involved in sustainability?
I think that learning about sustainability and about climate change in school was definitely a big part in my passion for sustainability. But my first exposure to sustainability was listening to youth activists such as Greta Thunberg, talking at international conferences, and that was really empowering for me.
Awesome. Laura,
Yeah.
your turn.
For me, I guess it really started in school, like in geography class, learning about climate change. And then from there, because I sail, I spend a lot of time out on the water, so I feel really connected to the environment. So my passion for sustainability really grew from there.
Awesome. Great descriptions, guys. I hope everybody, all of our participants are paying attention. All right, so we are going to have a Zoom poll. The poll will pop up. And our Zoom poll question is, are you involved in sustainability? All right, I guess I'll ask our alumni first before the Zoom poll does pop up is, are you currently involved in sustainability?
Yeah, so I think both of us over the past year have been involved through the project that we sort of initiated because of the Youth Climate Summit.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think because of the Youth Climate Summit, we're a lot more aware of what we can do to be more sustainable. And so we've been super aware of making sure that our containers, our water bottles, what we're using is reusable and we're not wasting things unnecessarily.
That's perfect, guys. So we're still having technical issues with the poll. So Andreas, would you mind discussing the results for me as I can't see them?
Yeah, so about half of people are saying yes, they are involved in sustainability. A third of people are saying that they're not sure, and the remainder are saying that no, they're not.
Awesome, thanks very much. All right, so Laura, what have you done this year that you're most proud of?
So I think the thing that I'm most proud of is that as a sustainability group, we did a radio interview one morning. And through this, we were able to get our message about sustainability out to a large audience. And even though I was quite nervous about talking like sort of on the radio, it went well. So I was really proud of that.
I think that for me, engaging with the community has been really eye-opening for me, especially working with Beyond Plastic, which is a local environmental NGO, to discuss our pilot program. I really enjoyed getting their advice on how best to ensure sustainability in our community.
That's awesome work with Beyond Plastics. They are a great organization. Ava, what person inspired you most during the Youth Climate Summit last year?
I think that Mari Cockney, or Little Miss Flint, inspired me the most. When she was around 8 years old, there was a big water crisis in her town of Flint, Michigan. And she ended up writing a letter to the then President Barack Obama, bringing light to the issue. She was able to garner international and national attention and has now acted as an activist for environmental sustainability and clean water for all. So that was really inspiring for me.
That's awesome. Laura, what is your favorite sustainability tip?
I think that for me, my top sustainability tip is every little bit counts. So whatever you're doing, whether it's big or small, everything adds up in the long run.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that for me, it's watching what watching what you're wasting. I think that we throw away things unnecessarily, and so as soon as we're aware of that, we can really make big differences.
I totally agree. There needs to be more reuse in Bermuda than waste.
Definitely.
Our next question, we'll start with Ava. What fact-finding trip did you enjoy the most?
I think that visiting the chef shop was really great with me. This really goes with the idea of I really enjoyed engaging with the community, and it was really eye-opening and really great to hear that the Bermudian community was so willing to help us with our project.
Yeah, I think I agree with Ava. I found the visit to the chef shop really, I really enjoyed that because we were, again, able to engage with the community and sort of learn what local businesses were doing to help promote sustainability.
Laura, what is your favorite Bermudian beach and why?
I quite enjoy Horseshoe Bay. Even though it is like sort of favored by the tourists, it's always sort of cleaned up the best because like in the summer they rake the beaches. That one's definitely my favorite.
I mean, I think I like all of the beaches. I really like Hog Bay, just because it's not that visited, but I think it really shows that we all have a big role to play in keeping our beaches clean and our environment healthy.
Definitely. And I agree with you, Laura. Horseshoe Bay is absolutely gorgeous. Ava, what person inspired you most during the Youth Climate Summit last year?
I mean, I think, you know, as I've talked about, obviously Mari Kopney was really inspiring. But I mean, I think Laura might have something to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I can't really narrow it down to one specific person who inspired me the most. I think that everybody who was at the Youth Climate Summit last year and everybody who I've met and interacted with over the entire year has really been inspiring to me in one way or another.
Awesome. Laura, what solutions do you have to limit your consumption of single-use plastics?
I think just whenever you're able to, I think choose a sustainable option. So for example, if you're going out to sort of buy lunch, try to get a reusable container. Things like that really help.
What about you, Ava?
I mean, I definitely agree with Laura. I think sustainable alternatives are so important. And that's something that we focused on with our pilot project. I think, yeah, really thinking critically, do I really need to use plastic, or is a sustainable alternative or not using plastic necessary or better?
That's awesome. Ava, what are your plans after you finish high school?
I'm planning to go to the UK to go to university and study law. But I think definitely when I come back, something that I'll be focused on is making sure that I still live a sustainable lifestyle and that I'm able to help people around me to live the same lifestyle as well.
That's an awesome commitment. And Laura, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm planning to go away to Canada and study at university, study math. So when I'm not quite sure what that degree is going to lead me to, but I think, again, when I come back to Bermuda, I'm definitely going to continue to try and promote a sustainable lifestyle.
Hey, Ava and Laura, thank you so much for being here. I'm curious, who are some people in Bermuda who inspire you to take action in the environmental space?
I think for me, sort of charities such as Beyond Plastic are really inspiring because they're doing so much work locally to promote sustainability.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there are a lot of great NGOs, but I also think that everybody who I've met through the Youth Climate Summit really inspire me to be sustainable and advocate for climate justice. And I think there's a lot of really good initiatives for me.
Yeah, are there any experiences from the past year that particularly stand out? So anything that surprised you, anything that, yeah, maybe anything that you weren't expecting, or yeah, new learnings along that line?
I mean, I think that we definitely learned a lot in the summit. And I think that hearing from, I guess a lot of the times it's easy to think that, you know, things won't change unless there's a lot of drive for it. But I think meeting with representatives of the community really showed me that there is a big initiative to take action on sustainability and to tackle climate change. And that was not, I guess it was surprising, but also it was really enlightening to hear and really made me hopeful.
Yeah, I think for me, sort of meeting people throughout this past year and seeing what they're doing, and then also our initiatives that we've taken, such as trying to educate people about sustainability issues in Bermuda, have really made an impact.
A question that I posed to our alum who spoke yesterday, and thank you for your responses so far, but I'm curious to know if you had, say, unlimited resources. So you're on the same projects, or maybe you can be visionary and start new projects. What would it be that that you would prioritize if you had a blank check to address the challenges presented to you? So I guess first, what are the challenges specifically that you would want to address? And yeah, what sort of ideas if there were no limits?
I mean, I think that what we did address through our project was knowledge and access to sustainable alternatives. But I think that if we had unlimited resources, we would definitely expand that a lot. I think that, you know, we might advocate for subsidies on reusable products or discounts, or to make them cheaper and therefore more accessible. And so I think that the accessibility thing was something that was really big for us, and something that I think in the future we'll definitely hopefully work to expand.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ava. Just increasing accessibility to sustainable alternatives is something that I really want to prioritize.
Great, thank you. And we'd love to also remind all of the participants that you can be posting your questions in the chat. That's your best way to communicate with all of the presenters throughout the program. So anything that you're curious about, maybe you heard a story, you heard a circumstance that you would be interested in getting involved in. So please reach out, please participate. We'd love to hear everything you have to say.
All right, well, I've got a question. How has your understanding of sustainability changed from going through the program?
I think that at first I definitely sort of knew like the dictionary definition of sustainability, but over the past year, I've definitely been able to see sort of sustainability applied in real world contexts.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think both of us were sort of broadly aware of what sustainability was, but now having gone through the summit, we can really look at how sustainability is implemented. And I think for me, I've definitely looked at sustainability tactics that I thought in the past were effective, but really might not actually be that effective in ensuring sustainability.
Awesome responses. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One thing that you would like the audience to know about you? Let's start with Laura.
I guess for me, one thing that I'd like people to know is that, you know, I sail a lot. That's sort of like my passion. And I guess that's sort of what led me into sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would want people to know that, you know, sustainability for me has been able to manifest itself in so many areas of my life, even, you know, learning in school about sustainability, but also outside of school, participating in the Youth Climate Summit, but even in my own life. So I think that I'd want people to know that sustainability is not just kind of one thing. It can really, we see sustainability and should aim to be sustainable in a lot of different areas.
I have a question. Something that Dr. Rivera Colasso shared was that it's naturally hard for younger people. The younger you are, the more difficult it is for you to recognize the changes that have taken place in the past, because you don't have that reference point, right? You're not able really to understand necessarily about how the world was before, but we understand the world today. And as we get older, we will understand the things that have changed. I'm curious to hear from you both. What are some of the iconic things of living in Bermuda, or similar to Dr. Isabel Rivera Colasso's question, what are the things that make Bermuda Bermuda, or make you Bermudian, that you sort of hold on to and are going to be your sort of your sort of reference point you think as you get older. Does that question make sense?
Yeah. Do you want to?
I think for me, it's definitely sort of the way that Bermuda tries in as much as it's possible for such a small island to be sustainable. For example, like the stepped roofs to collect rainwater, I think is a very thoughtful way to collect rainwater and be more sustainable in our everyday practices.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Laura. I think we always hear in a lot of different contexts that Bermuda punches a lot much above its weight on the international stage. And I think that in terms of the initiative for climate action and the initiative to protect our oceans, it's definitely the same. I think that our ecology and our ecosystem is a big part of Bermuda and our beaches, obviously.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. Someone is asking, what is one clever solution that you have found that is a simple change people can make that will have meaningful results?
I think reusable water bottles and reusable containers are a big thing. Obviously, our pilot project was purchasing reusable boxes, and we're working with the Berkeley Institute to implement them into those schools. But I think, yeah, in your lunchbox is a really big thing to use reusable containers and water.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ava. That's such like a simple way to change like everyday habits is just using a reusable water bottle and reusable containers.
All right, participants, please remember that tomorrow you'll be choosing your track, right? So you have conservation, sustainability, and climate justice.
Thank you, Ava and Laura for your time. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so if you go into the chat, you should see a link for the next poll, or rather it's just popping up on your screen. Do you think sustainability action helps tackle climate change in Bermuda? And yeah, the overwhelming majority of people are saying yes. There's like one person said no and two people said not sure. But yeah, the vast majority of people say yes. Great, thank you all. Yeah, thank you all for those participants, or thank you for your participation in that.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much. So I just see a note here from Helen asking to repeat tomorrow's track. So you have conservation, sustainability, and climate justice. Those are your three options.
And don't worry if it's not extremely clear right now. We will make sure we deliberately take time tomorrow to run everyone through the process so that everyone has the option to choose something that they're passionate about, you know, that they care about. And yeah, so if that seems overwhelming or you don't feel prepared for that, it's okay. I promise you, we will take time to make sure that everyone is able to work on a project and work with a group of people where they feel excited to work. I know that's a really important thing, is being on a project that you care about. So yeah, we'll make sure that everyone has time to really think about that and come to a good position on where they want to be, because that is the project that you will be working on throughout the rest of the year. So get excited for that.
All right, guys, today's session is coming to a close. You'll meet the alumni for climate justice tomorrow. Great responses today, awesome response time. You've been totally engaged and we appreciate it. I hope you've been inspired by the science and stories that were shared here today. I'd like to thank today's youth climate activist, Rain Sullivan, our subject matter expert, Dr. Isabel Rivera-Collazo, YCS 2021 alumni, Ava Gibson, and Laura Hopman, of course. And of course,
and real quick, Noah, right before we sign off, we actually are going to land with a final Mentimeter for the day. So this should be coming up in your chat. Yeah, so if everyone could follow that link. Similar to yesterday, we really wanted to hear people's overall reflection on the experience. We're pivoting from yesterday's subject of just introducing what climate change is to really talking about the impacts that it's having. So yeah, again, we just want to hear your reflections. So things you understood, things that were confusing to you, things that really stood out to you, things that you were surprised by. Yeah, if there's a specific fact that jumped out to you as something you didn't know before, we really want to understand what it was that you took away from this experience.
All right, so I'm going to go back and just give our thanks to youth climate activist Rain Sullivan, our subject matter expert, Dr. Isabel Rivera-Collazo, YCS 2021 alumni Ava Gibson and Laura Hopman. And of course, thank you again to our partners, especially HSBC and AXA-XL for facilitating this amazing event. This is Noelle signing off, and we can't wait to see you all tomorrow for day 3 of the 2022 BUEI Youth Climate Summit.